What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop stream for the Worldwide Technologies Championship. Going to get you ready for all of your exposure this week with a breakdown to the DFS side, your props out there for round number one. Whatever questions that you've got for me, any sort of player deep dives, you name it, all of that before tomorrow's slate. So we'll go through a weather report, some ownership towards the top end of the leaderboard. I'll build a lineup or two together, show you what that looks like on Draftkings, and also wrap it up with some prop exposure towards the end. So if you're looking for some underdog and prize picks props, that'll be towards the second half. First half, we'll be focusing on the DFS side. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. So if you didn't see my course breakdown this week, this is going to be a very easy track. It's a resort style course, wide open fairways, just like what we had in Utah. And although it's not played at elevation, the firm and fast nature of this golf course makes it play a little bit shorter than the scorecard yardage. So that's why we had minus 27 when the first time with Eric Van Rooyen, but last year Austin Eckroat won at minus 24 as well. So I would expect something at least minus 20 winning. I don't think it necessarily has to be as low as minus 27 like the first time we played there, but expect to see low scoring compared to most weeks on tour. And a few of the metrics that we do have available, you can see on the screen. It is an event that we don't have shots gained and shot link data for every single time that we've played there. So we know that the green regulation rate, just based on the shot trails, is about 81.1%, but no fairway percentage because of the data that we have available. And scrambling rate, some of these other things that we have here are a little bit wonky because of the data that we have coming in. But it's an easy course, birdie average, way higher than your average at 5.11 per round. Bogey or worse average, only 1.72 per round. But what is worth noting is just like we had at the Bank of Utah Championship, is that when you hit the ball offline and you get off of the fairways at this golf course, there are some spots of bother. In fact, there were quite a few doubles or worse at this golf course last year, and that's only with one hole that has water in play. And even that one hole, the water isn't even that squarely close to where players are hitting it. So it is those natural areas. It was lava at the Bank of Utah Championship, more so the desert at this golf course that these players have to be worried about. So that's the golf course, wide open. We're looking for driving distance. That's a key stat that I'm using for this week. Birdie or better percentage as well. I need guys who can get to at least minus 20 to have the aggressive mindset and the ability to make 7 or 8 birdies per round. And then putting's always important at a birdie fest. Shots gained approach as well. We need guys that are hitting the ball well. Those are the main things that I'm using in my modeling. Before we go through some of the ownership at the top end of the leaderboard, top end of the pricing, I should say, let's go through the weather report for the first few days. And at least based on round one and round two, it looks flat across the board. So we're going through the GFS model in here. Because we are outside of the United States, we don't have the HRRR like we normally go through, but the GFS is the next best that we've got. And the GFS model has only about a 2-mile-an-hour differential from the low point to the high point. The low point's about midday, believe it or not, which is kind of atypical there, but a low point of about 9 miles an hour. And then the high points are on either end of the spectrum. You've got 11 miles an hour to kick off at 7 a.m. It kicks up to about 11 miles an hour for an hour or two in the PM wave as well. But overall, the winds look almost carbon copy from the morning to the afternoon wave, and the temperatures, they rise a little bit throughout the day, but it's not like it's a 10 to 20, 30 degree difference. You're talking about very comfortable temperatures from the first tee time at 76 degrees, going up to the mid 80s by the afternoon. So it might play a little easier in the morning just because of the more receptive greens. Also with them being a little bit more pristine as well, not as many scuff marks or people walking in as much traffic on those green complexes throughout the day. But from the weather perspective, it is extremely flat for Thursday. And then for Friday, we're going to use the GFS model as well. And this has actually changed a little bit since the last time that I just looked at it. But for the most part, it looks flat. And you may say, oh, the color change looks like it's going to be a little calmer in the morning. But in reality, it's going from 5 or 6 miles an hour to 9 to 10 in the afternoon. That's not a big enough difference to go out there and full stack. And about half an hour to an hour ago, it was 7 to 8 miles an hour during the morning wave on Friday, and then 8 to 10 in the afternoon. So no matter which way you splice it up, even with this latest forecast that they just dropped, it doesn't look like there's anything actionable over the first couple of days. Like maybe for showdown purposes, we can go after some morning wave starters for that given round. But over the first couple days, I think it's going to equal out over the first couple days of action. And if whether it's like a 0.12, maybe a 0.3 shot difference that you're getting towards the morning wave on either day, it's going to be completely made up for the next time that you're playing out there. So it looks very similar across the board the first couple rounds. And just for completion's sake, we'll also go through the icon and ECM models on here as well. So icon model for Thursday looks extremely flat. Only about a 2-mile-an-hour differential from the low point to the high point there. And it's, I don't know, maybe 2 hours in the morning on Thursday where it looks a little bit calmer. And then if we go to Friday, it's the same kind of story, almost exactly flat from the morning to the afternoon wave, slightly calmer for like 2 hours during the morning wave. So once again, anything you'd be making up for on the first day is getting completely wiped out by the morning wave on the second day, also getting that little bit of a break. And then if we go to the ECM model, that's one that we see regardless of country. Let's do that one too. Thursday looks like tomorrow morning, there's a little bit of a window where players can take advantage. And then if we go to Friday, it's very slight, but once again, slightly lower winds from like 9 to 11 a.m. So pretty much no matter which one we look at here, there's not a massive weather edge to be had. We'll just do the last one. Might as well go through all four of them at this point. Thursday, as flat as you could possibly get, 8 miles an hour the entire time. And then for Friday's forecast, it's between 6 to 8 miles an hour on this Medio Blue model. So I wouldn't play any sort of a weather edge in your lineups. If you're a 150 max player, I guess it's more of a consideration than if you're just playing a single entry or just a few lineups on top of that. If you're only entering like 3 to 15 lineups, then the weather shouldn't really be a consideration for you whatsoever. But if you are 150 maxing, you're in that 50 to 150 mark with your exposure, you might want to throw like 5% and go with a 6-0 in either direction, just in case something wonky happens, like a storm comes through, makes the golf course wet for the PM/AM guys, right? They get the absolute nutted conditions after the morning guys don't get that kind of a storm. There's no forecasts that are calling for that kind of weather, but we've seen crazier things happen before. So outside of the just in case kind of stacks in your large field GPP exposure, I don't see anything for the first couple of days. And, because I'm not a big round one showdown guy, I'm personally not going to have any exposure out there myself tomorrow. If I was, I would probably lean like 65-35 towards the guys going off in the morning, but I will be keeping an eye on some of the scoring averages throughout the day so that we can use that for round 2 showdown. Because as you guys know, if you've been watching my content for any length of time before, round 2 through 4 showdown is what we focus on here on the channel. So we'll be circling back to that tomorrow evening with the live stream, which we're doing covering for Friday's action. But at least for main slate purposes and, what we're locking in for tonight's, not that much that we have to talk about right there. Let's move on to ownership, and we're going to go through the top end of the board with ownership, the guys from 8K and above and where they stand for the field. And we're going to give you an idea of what the field is doing because, weather's part of the edge that we can generate, especially from a showdown slate for any given round. On top of that, it's mostly game theory with golf. We can project all we want. I guess that's another one of the 3 ways we can generate an edge when playing PGA DFS, but arguably the biggest of the 3 different ways you can generate an edge is playing against the rest of the field, because like some of the other sports that are more variant, when you're playing DFS, when it's a more variant sport, it's hard to really narrow down who's going to win any given week. You want to play guys that are low owned. You don't want to hold hands with 20 to 35% of the field if you can help it in a lot of cases, which is why heading into lock, especially with your guys towards the top end of the board, it's important to know where the rest of the field is coming in. So that's why we're focusing on the ownership so much. That's why we have a whole segment dedicated to it here on the live stream. And it's not to say that you can't play guys that are high owned. You can have some high owned guys in your lineups. It's just that when you use players that are going to be higher owned than the players around them, then you've got to compensate for it elsewhere. So for example, if you guys watched the content that I had on Monday, Ben Griffin is my favorite play on the slate. I think that he's by far the best player that we have in this field, at least based on the last 5 to 6 months. He's just been that guy over that kind of a sample size. I'm playing him despite him being 35% owned. When I'm using him in lineups, I'm just going to have to compensate that with my other 5 spots. If I get 1 to 2 other players that are sub 5% matched up with them, then it's not going to matter that I have somebody that's 35 to 40% owned. And it's the same thing for Sunday Showdown. Sunday Showdown, when the placement points are a factor and we have to differentiate ourselves and get the winner, it's usually one of the guys starting in the top 3 to top 5 that's going to win. And all those guys are like 40% owned for Sunday Showdown. it's not to say that you have to fade the whole top end of the board, right? We obviously have to have some of those guys in our lineups. It's just that when you're using players that are going to be that popular, you have to be very intentional about where you're differentiating yourself on top of it. So that's what the takeaway from this. The players should maybe be slightly careful about when you're using. And also the flip side of it is when we can find some of the players that are lower owned towards the top end of the board, they present quite solid leverage opportunities as well. So we'll go through the ownership here in a second. I do want to catch up on the live chat and say hi to anybody that's peeking in there. If you have any specific questions about players, feel free to let me know in the live chat. That can be player pool deep dives. That could be strategy-based questions. All of those are fair game. On here, this is the Patreon projection sheet. It is a bit censored as I've got to keep a lot of the paywall stuff behind the Patreon paywall. That's my player pool projections, modeling, all of that kind of stuff. But we do have recent form on here. So the last, I think, 6 to 8 events for every single player. They have event history. So the last 2 years at this golf course, shots gained over the last 24, last 12 measured rounds, which we can use for any of those player pool deep dives. So maybe it's a one-on-one that you're considering. You're trying to figure out the pros and cons of using one player or another. All of that is live here. But if you guys want to download these sheets, have all of these research tools for every single player that's in the field, make sure to check out the Golf DFS tier on my Patreon page. Link down below to join that. It's in the description. And unlike a lot of other sites that are $50 to $100 a month and that are completely half-assing it this time of year, we're full bore. Obviously, we're treating it just like a major championship week here on the channel with all the content that we're doing. And it's only $15 a month for everything I have to offer. So I think you'd be absolutely silly not to join my website and not to get these tools for the kind of price that I'm offering on my stuff compared to some of the other slapdick sites that are out there. And we're not going to do a whole rant on the sites having terrible projections because we've done that 1,000 times before on these live streams. But I will say, after going through some of the community projections this week, that a lot of the bigger sites were leaving like 1 to 2K on the table again. So if you're looking at your ownership projections, they look a little bit different than what you're seeing on the screen here. For example, like a lot of websites had like Ben Griffin at like 20 to 22% owns. Well, I would love that. Hands up, caught me. I would love to see that, him being 20 to 22% owned. You're high as shit if you think that's going to be the case. He's by far the best player on the slate. The people have to spend their salary somewhere. And on those websites that had him at like 20 to 22%, it's the ones where you don't see videos from them, right? They're just kind of just posting projections. I guess that's most websites this time of year, right? You're not seeing really dedicated content from anyone other than smaller creators like myself or my guy Byron, who shout out to Byron. He's an absolute legend. He does a lot of his stuff over there on the Mayo Media Network channel, obviously. A lot of these other websites, though, that will put like a Griffin at 20% are leaving 1 to 2K on the table on average. So if your projections look like that, just know that they're absolute nonsense. And you should probably buy projections that are a little bit more accurate because obviously if the projections are leaving 1 to 2K on the table, then the guys in the 9-10K range are going to be vastly under projected. So guys like Griffin would maybe be, an extreme example of that, but it's not just a Griffin. It's the whole top end of the board. The projections I saw on a few of the different websites out there, again, we're going to end the rant right here, but they were nasty. They were like 5 to 10% lower on all these players that I have highlighted, which is just, if you know anything about putting together projections, is nonsense. So I'll call it what it is, right? Some of those websites are just, I don't know, tisk, tisk, tisk. What's going on, Jose? Welcome on in, my man. He said, let's get rich. Amen to that. I would certainly love to do that this week. We'll see how it works out. What's going on? Anthony Marino says, hey, Luke, thoughts on Shank and Molinax as a few value plays this week? So neither one's, a player that I'm counting on. There's one that's on my short list or anything like that, Anthony. So I guess my initial take is probably 5 out of 10 on either player. But I will say that both of them were in consideration for me this week. Neither one is somebody that I'm personally investing in myself, but in Adam Shank, he's shown a few semblances of hope lately, so I don't think that's the worst thing I've ever seen before. Trey Molinax is the long player off the tee. That's one of the key stats that I'm looking for in my players. He's also shown a few glimpses of hope over the last month or so, 5 out of 10 on either one, but maybe that's harsh. Maybe a 5.5, a 6 out of 10 is a more appropriate rating because they were if I had a player pool that was closer to like 40, 50 players this week, they would have made my exposure. But I'm personally condensing it down a bit more. I'm still playing my 150 lineups, but I'm being a little bit more aggressive about who I'm using. What's going on, Brant? It says, hola, amigo, vamos. Well, yeah, I wish it was the Cinco de Mayo because I'd cheers you with some tequila. But yeah, down in Mexico, it's always nice. A beautiful golf courses down that way. What's going on, Primo? He says, the grind doesn't stop. Love the consistency, of course, man. He said, can you tell me my thoughts on Lee Hodges when you get a chance? And he said, appreciate me as always. Appreciate you, Primo. Thanks for the nice comments there. And yeah, let's get to your Lee Hodges call. So Lee Hodges is somebody I usually default to the ball striking stats on because he gets hot with those at times. Let's see. Lately, he's been okay off the tee, losing with his approach play. That's a bit suspect. But if we zoom out to the last 24, let's get a little bit of a better look there. Over that sample size, he's a neutral off the tee, so a little bit worse there, but gaining 0.4 strokes on approach. You know, he's been Jekyll and Hyde lately. He's been good off the tee at points and then terrible off the tee lately. And then, good on approach over the last 24 rounds, but then terrible over the last 12. If he could be more consistent in those two categories, he has upside for GPPs. The issue is the putter, and he's not a very consistent putter. He's not somebody we'd expect to finish top 25 in putting by the end of the year or anything like that. If he gets hot on the greens, that combined with a good ball striking week could get him there. But there's a lot of ifs at that point, right? There's a lot of stipulations, a lot of things that have to come together for him to be a good play. So that's a GPP only sort of option, in my opinion. When you have, kind of a sketchy player like that, he's going to be relatively low owned. We're not going to have the ownership below 8K on this spreadsheet to go through, but I can tell you from doing my projections earlier that he's sub 5% owned in large field GPPs. That aspect does make him intriguing for the big 150 max contest, but in your cash lineups, in your single entries, even like your 20 max kind of contests, I probably wouldn't be going that, to a nasty play like that, if it makes sense. They're just guys that make a little bit more sense that are still low owns that you could use instead of him. He said, thoughts on a Grillo over Sneddon Power for plus 140. So yeah, we're going to talk more about the bets later on. I will say though, that I like Grillo this week. He was one of my outright bets, one of my core plays as well. So, a Snedeker and Power group, two guys that are a little bit older, you can't completely sleep on Sneds. He's had a few good weeks over the last season or so, but he's certainly the worst player out of that threesome. Seamus Power has also become a lot more inconsistent over the last year. I'm not sure plus 140 is enough for me to bite on that myself, Jack, but out of those three players, I would want my money on Grillo. That's for damn sure. I wouldn't want it to be on an old crusty Sneds. Wouldn't want it to be on a rusty and kind of sketchy Seamus Power form. So you're not going to get too much pushback from me there. Any thoughts on Clan? He said the data looks good on easy scoring, and then he scores on par fives and makes a lot of birdies. He said, what are my thoughts? So a lot of what we said there makes me like him at Birdie Fest. That's why I played him last time out. Didn't really work out perfectly, but he's been worse than what we saw the last time that he played. So I'm with you on it. He's a long player. Driving distance, I think, matters at this sort of a golf course. The problem is that the form's been a little bit more inconsistent than people would like, but now he's low owned. He's sub 7% owned in most contests, and he's in that 7K range. He's not an 8K golfer. He's not a 9K golfer like he was at times in some of the weaker fields in 2025. So I'm a buyer, and I'm a huge Luke Clanton guy. I've literally played golf with him before, so to say I'm biased would be an understatement. But from just the pure non-biased view, good birdie maker, long off the tee, you're buying the dip on him, but kind of like we just had when we were talking about Lee Hodges, I'm not quite sure I'd trust him in like cash or single entries. Like he's got too wide of a range of outcomes for me to use him in that sort of format. Like it would not surprise me. It's worth adding on to this kind of description. If he misses the cut, like that would be not surprising in the least. Like his floor is shooting +6, +7 and missing the cut. That can happen when he gets the around the green yips. You've seen that a lot from him over the last couple months, but he keeps the ball in play off the tee. It's a really wide course from that perspective. Should be okay there. And then he hits a bunch of greens, doesn't put himself in a situation to lose a bunch of strokes around the green. I like his chances to play well. So yeah, I'm on him, man. What's going on, Alina? He said you're late, but you're happy to be back playing PGA DFS. Me too, man. It's always a good week when we have a golf tournament to handicap. Thoughts on strokes for Pearson Coody and then an under for Carson Young. So you're looking at under on both, I'm assuming, right? Because I don't see an over and an under for the first one. But let's start with the second because I know that you're looking at Carson Young for the under at 69. I think the scoring average, this might help you out with some of this, Jose, it's going to be between -2 and -2.5. So a Carson Young, who I have as about a field average player, I would actually have his value towards the over because I would put his projection at 69.5 or 70. So I personally would be going the other way on that, man. We're going to talk more about the props towards the second half of this live stream. And you have to let me know what you want on Pearson there because depending on whether you're looking over or under, I'll be giving you a slightly different feedback. How much am I weighing putting on past palm greens? So yeah, I'm not sure if you caught my course breakdown or not, but that is one of the key stats that I'm using this week. I'm looking at that on top of regular putting form heading in. So well, in my model, it's a reason why I think Ben Griffin's a great play. He's gaining over 2 strokes putting per round of past palm. It's also why a player like Eric Cole is popping in my projections because he's gaining like 1.67 shots gained putting per round on past palm. You want to deep dive Stephen Fisk and David Ford? So yeah, Alina, I'm going to kind of have you watch my content because a lot of these questions you would have had the answer to ahead of time if you watched my videos. For example, Stephen Fisk is one of my outright bets this week, so I absolutely love him. So for my full take on that, I've got a whole 3 or 4 minutes on my DFS preview. I'm going to have you watch that for that one. We're not going to do the redo here, but I will talk about David Ford. So David Ford played extremely well at the Bank of Utah Championship. That's my #1 comp course by far to what we have this week. So anyone that showed up on that leaderboard, Michael Brennan included, the winner from that golf tournament, has to be in consideration for this golf tournament. And he's a relatively long player off the tee. He does deal with accuracy issues. He's a young player from the NCAA. He was towards the top end of the rankings on the collegiate rankings this past year. A lot of those players, like an Aubert, has been an absolute stud. We've had a lot of success stories from the top 3 to the top 5 of those collegiate rankings. Ford is supposed to be one of those players. And he got off to a little bit of a cold start. Like he missed a whole bunch of cuts when no one kind of knew who he was. It would not surprise me, though, if over the next, 6 months or so, if he picked off his first ever tour win. So I'm not sure if it's going to be this week. I feel like it's kind of chasing after seeing the box score from last time out for people wanting to play him now. But if you were a buyer on Ford before the Bank of Utah Championship, then you should for sure be playing him here because it's the same kind of course. It's the same kind of skill set that really translates from venue to venue. So no real pushback there. The unfortunate aspect, though, is, and this is why I said, it kind of feels like chasing, is the ownership's higher and he's more expensive now. So unless you really liked him before, if you weren't liking David Ford when he was in the 6K range and sub 2% owned, then I'm not sure why people are liking him now that he's like 7,500 and 5% owned. It's just that's the pushback I would give some people on that one. He said he loved the content and appreciate me deep diving the players. Of course, that's always what we do here. If you have any more, feel free to let me know, my man. And how many birdies around does the winner need to make this week? He said 6 or 7. I think it's 7 or 8 because there are bogeys to be had out there. So it's not the kind of golf course where you're just going to have bogey-free rounds. So by the way, if your guys make an early bogey tomorrow, it's not the end of the world, especially for DFS. You're going to have guys that are making 7 to 8 birdies per round. So I would bump it up even a little bit more. And for showdown purposes, in terms of an optimal play, you probably have to make, let me stop bumping my mic there, an eagle and 6 birdies or 7, 8 birdies to get to that sort of performance. It's one of those kind of golf courses. So it's it's one where, your -2, your -3 bogey-free rounds might be good elsewhere. It's not going to do jack shit this time around. But let's finish off this ownership. If you guys have any specific deep dives on top of what we already went through, feel free to go ahead and let me know. But ownership at the top end of the board is pretty condensed on some players, especially on some of the guys that are playing well heading in. Some of them, including Ben Griffin, I'm still using despite that chalk. You guys can see Garrett Higo was another player that I have down as a core play. I bet him to win at 27.5 to 1, so I'll be eating some of that chalk. But this kind of lazy ownership does present quite the game theory opportunity. When we have guys that are nearly 30% owned, especially at a fall series event, a birdie fest like this, it makes it really easy to find spots to go 0 on and to completely take stands against. Because when you're at a birdie fest like this, the variance that I mentioned with golf before gets ramped up even more. At a ball striking fest, at a golf course that's extremely difficult, where you've got long 4-inch rough, the round the green shots are some of the most difficult that we have in the world. The world's best players will finish top 5, top 10. Every single time. It's why Scotty Scheffler at the major championships is borderline unbeatable. It's why Tiger Woods, when he was playing his best golf, was borderline unbeatable. It's why guys like Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele don't finish outside of the top 20 very often when you put them on a very difficult course, or you put them at a major championship, for example. At this golf course, it is the exact opposite of that. They are 60-yard wide fairways on average. That's the fairway width. That's not the corridor width. The corridor average width is like 75 yards wide on average. The corridor width, by the way, is where you can find your golf ball and play it with a decent lie in most cases. 75 yards wide is 3/4 of a football field. You guys, I mean, I'm sure you can visualize how wide that is. It's almost impossible to hit balls that are offline. These guys in this kind of scenario, it all comes down to the putting. You don't have to worry about that skill. There's not as much of a steep learning curve like you have at a Torrey Pines or you have at a Pinehurst, where any shot offline is going to get punished to its fullest. These guys can spray the golf ball, and if they make a bunch of 10 to 15 footers, they can shoot someone like -6 to -7. That's why a lot of these players that are chalk on here, unless you really like them, unless you were on a Monday targeting them, betting them outright, like I had on a Ben Griffin or a Garrett Kigo here, you might want to think twice about playing them in your lineup. So that's personally how I handle it. If they were players that I had conviction on a Monday, I'm still going to use them despite those ownership numbers. But when I'm getting to a Wednesday and I'm rounding off my player pool, which is what I do, I have, some early leans in the week, but I don't really commit to anyone but my favorite plays on a Monday. But when I get to Wednesdays where I add like 80% of my player pool, those 80% of players that I'm adding on Wednesday aren't going to be the chalk in these two ranges. It's usually going to be the guys that are surprisingly under-owned, guys that I thought might be averagely owned that are, for example, like a Keith Mitchell, 6.6% owned. I thought the Bomber, the high birdie percentage would at least get some people there, but no one wants to play my guy Killer Keith. So you know what I'm going to do on a week like this? I'll sprinkle him into some of my large field GPP lineups. That's how we use this ownership, which is why guys like a Spawn, a Hobie, a Grazerman here are, in Grazerman's case, the ownership's not so bad. In fact, 17.5% is low ownership compared to some of these other guys around him. But these 25 to 30% ownership players, you've got to use them in half of your lineups, 50% to get 2x leverage. You've got to really like them to want to commit to them and use them in your lineup. So have some players up here that you're using, commit to them, try and get that 2x leverage if you can, and then find some players to take in 0% of lineups and that you're hoping you're missing the cut by the end of the weekend. Going down into the 9K range, a Thor Bjornsson, a Higo are the two players that really stand out. But you've got about a flat 16 to 17% on guys like an Olesen, a Kevin Yu, and a Michael Brennan. Going down into the 8K range, it starts to polarize a little bit more. By polarization, the chalk gets a little bit chalkier. The low-owned plays tend to get a little bit lower-owned. And the most glaring example of that is that we've got players like a Grillo that are about 13% ownership in that 8K range, and guys like Keith Mitchell that are less than half the ownership. Whereas if we go to the range above that, our lowest owned player in this 9K range, is 16.2% on a Michael Thor Bjornsson, and your highest owned player is a Garrett Higo. That is a 1.5x difference from an Olesen to a Higo, literally almost exactly 1.5x multiplier from player to player. It's 2x down here in this 8K range. And we talk about this all the time, but the polarization that you see in the ownership, the difference between the high-owned guys and the low-owned guys just continues to grow as you go further down the board. And without nerding out too much about game theory and the implications and what that should do to your strategy too much here in the live stream, because we could talk about that for hours, about why it's important to, consider that as you're getting down to the 6 and 7K range. But in short, the SparkNotes version of that is when the gap gets bigger, like for example, in the 6K range, where there are guys that are 5 to 6% owned and then legit 0.1 to 0.2% got 0.2 percenters. Excuse me there. My mouth's getting a little bit dry. I'll get a sip of water here in a second. But when there's a legit 20 to 30x difference, because that's the difference, right? Sometimes even bigger. Sometimes it's a 50 to a 60x difference from the 0.1%er to the guy that's 6% owned in that 6K range. It becomes even more so important to incorporate that ownership angle. So that's why up top, the ownership is important. You don't want to play a whole bunch of these 35%ers if you can help it. But that's why I'm still okay with having some of these guys lingering into my lineups. But when we get down into that 8K range, in the 6K range, even more so than that, I'm not as okay with playing a lot of that chalk. And unless they were players that on a Monday were my conviction plays, which I'll still use them in the 6, 7K range. If they were one of my first outright bets and they still end up chalk, like I'll just use them and I'll get different elsewhere. But if that's not the case, those sort of players in the 6-7K range are not going to make it into my player pool. So that's my personal process. That is what I have found a lot of success with over the last 4 to 5 years, playing PGA DFS to a professional level. And what I think you guys can take away from this is that your process doesn't have to be the same as everyone else, right? You want to do what works well for you. If you find that playing more chalk towards the bottom end of the board works better for you, then by all means, right? You can, work on that. Maybe you just have a better eye for finding guys in the 6K range that are chalk than I do, but always have a process, always be refining it, look back at your results, try and figure out what went right and what went wrong in your process. And having a player pool built out like this, like I'm a content creator, so that's half the reason that I have my player pool built out like this, but it also lets me go back and figure out what went right and what went wrong. I can go back to my player pool, look at my projections, see exactly why I was on certain players, and then based on the leaderboard and based on the results that are coming in, back check and figure out what I need to emphasize more and what I need to cut out of my process that's maybe costing me some ROI in different given places. So that's the ownership in this 8K range. Outside of Griot, I guess, Cootie at 12.6%. That's somebody that's getting a little bit more steam than his peers. And then a Wyndham Clark at $8,900. He's also 12% owned. And he's really only getting played because of the name recognition. Like there's going to be enough slapdicks out there that play Wyndham Clark just because they've seen him in majors. They know that he throws clubs, that he's a former major winner, that kind of stuff. So they'll use him in their GPP builds. I guess, spoiler alert, I'm also okay with using Wyndham Clark this week. Like, I don't think he's a terrible play. But a lot of the guys here, like even a Griot to a certain extent, they're only getting played because they're better. Like some of these guys here just suck. Like they're not players that are normally 8 to 9K. So you're getting the guys like Wyndham that have that more name recognition, being a little bit more popular than their peers. But outside of that, it's usually form that's making a lot of these guys shock. Like you can see that with the Brennans, the Kevin Hughes, the Thorbjorn Olesens. Oleson's number 3 in recent form. That's why he steamed up to like 16%. It's rather predictable towards the top. So for the rest of this projection sheet, it's where you guys can see the 6 and 7K range chalk. You guys can find that via the Golf DFS tier on my Patreon. Again, it's only $15 a month to join over there. Absolute no-brainer. If you guys haven't already checked it out, link in the description to go out there and join. Let me get that sip of water I was talking about. It's well overdue at this point. I just realized, Ross, I don't know if you were going with that meme at the end, that 6-7 meme or not. It kind of feels like you were. Based on what you had there, it took me a second if that's what you were going for there, that reference. What's going on, Anthony? He said, thanks, Luke. Is Tom Hoge playable again? You see that he's had a pretty decent week in Utah. So, yeah, that's the question. Is that a sign of things to come on Tom Hoge, or is that just a one-week aberration? I certainly hope that it's the prior because I'm a Tom Hoge fan. He's somebody that's won on tour before. Normally when he plays well, he's capable of top 5, top 10ing. Not everyone in the field is necessarily capable of saying that. So I sure hope so, Anthony, but it's only a 1-week sample size. So it's impossible to really tell at this point. I think that it's okay to allocate some shares now, maybe like a 5%, 7% at the very most sort of shares, just in case he pops off. The ownership in my projections is sub 2%. So pretty much no one's getting there. So even 4% would be over double the field. Just give yourself enough to where if he goes off, you have enough combinations to get something rolling with your other 5 spots because, the leverage is infinite on that sort of an option. He said, Hayden Springer, late entry. Any thoughts on him? So you can't play him in DFS because he won't be in the player pool. So I guess for DFS, that's the one PSA on Hayden Springer. I will say that he's a long player. He's a high birdie percentage guy. He shot 59 before on tour. I think that he makes sense for showdown if we can squeeze him in there for rounds 2 through 4. But unfortunately, with the late ads, will not be somebody that we can play. And yeah, I just saw what you did there, Ross. It's I hate that meme. I think it's just a little silly. I saw the advertisement that the NFL was doing on with it was something else. I thought I was dreaming or something. I was like, there's no way the NFL is actually doing this, but they were. And I guess it's to appease some of the younger crowd members out there. But let's build a lineup together. So talking through the ownership will let us know where some of the field is going. But let's show you actually using that in practice. And you guys know I like some chalk, so I'm going to show you what that looks like when I'm still using more popular players because it has ramifications on how I'm building my lineup. So I'm going to start off this lineup very chalky towards the top. In fact, probably chalkier than I'm going to do in most cases. But the Ben Griffin, and we'll go with Higo as our second man in. They're both core plays for me. They're both players that I am prioritizing. However, when you have a 25%er and then a 35%er as your first 2 players in, it pigeonholes you into a spot where if you play any other chalk, then you're worrying about duplicating and you're worrying about a lack of leverage in this sort of a build. So I'm going to show you what should be going through your head when you start with this kind of a chalky start. So we're at 75.5 remaining for our last 4 spots. Probably means we can squeeze in an 8K guy if we want to. In fact, I'm going to throw in a chalky 8K guy just to make our life a little bit harder on our last 3 spots here. But realistically, I'd like a Griot. He's another core play for me. So we're just going to throw him in there, right? I think he makes a lot of sense. He's a good pass palm putter and has been ball striking it, I think, a lot better than most people would give him a credit for. And now we've got 3 spots where all of our leverage has to come in, because even Griot's 12 to 13%. We're not really getting any differentiation in that 8K range. If we see some chalk down here with our last 3 spots, like a lower 7K guy that's like 7% owned that we want to use, if we want to go back and change out a Griot and maybe go to a Keith Mitchell instead, maybe we can make that sort of thing work. But as is, because we've got the super chalky start with the first 2 and Griot already in there, our last 3 players, we can't compromise on. If the large field GPPs, the big $5 or $25 GPPs, we absolutely have to have guys that are sub 5 to sub 7% owned. 7% owned would be the hard cap. You can't go over that sort of number. I want guys that are sub 5% owned if we can find them. So in this range, Gsluke Clanton would be one of those players. He's at $7,400. He's not going to be overly owned because of some of the sketchy form heading in. That puts us at about $7,200 remaining for our last couple spots. You know, William Mao, he's played some really good golf over the last couple months. It would be nice to play him, but he's going to be a lot chalkier than what we want. So maybe an EVR makes sense. And EVR has won at this golf course before, but his form lately has been utter trash. We have to make some of those ownership decisions because of who we started off our lineup with. And to circle back to this, if we want to use a William Mao, maybe he's that piece of 7K chalk, and I'm going to put him in quotes there on chalk because he's not really chalk at like 7% at the bottom end of the 7K range, but he's a little bit higher owned than some of the other players that we have around him. If you want to make that kind of decision, it might not be a terrible idea to go back to a player like Rio and to force your hand a little bit more. So to go up to an $8,700 Keith Mitchell and take somebody who's like half the ownership of a Griot. So now when you're taking the 7-8% owned William Mao at the bottom end of the 7K range, you don't feel nearly as guilty about it. And if you're a last minute in here at $6,700, we can't build an entire lineup together because Draftkings highly frowns upon that. We'll ban accounts apparently for building whole lineups on live stream. So we're going to avoid that just for the terms of service there. But no matter who you use at $6,700, you would be fine in this sort of build because there's no one at $6,700 that is overly chalky. Like I think the highest owned guy is Ford, and he's like 3 to 4% owned. Even if you used him, you can get away with that in the large field GPPs. If you wanted to be safe about it, go to anybody but a David Ford, and you're not going to duplicate yourself with anyone, regardless of the contest that you're entering. But don't forget about leaving salary on the table. So let's go back to this lineup build, and let's throw a Griot back in there. And in fact, instead of a Gsluke Clanton, we're going to be a little chalkier about it, and we're going to go and take a Stephen Fisk, who, if you guys heard me earlier, I love. I bet him outright. Have a whole section on it on my DFS preview that I did earlier this week. In this case, if we're building this for the large field GPP and you want to be this chalky with your 5 spots, it's not a complete death sentence. It is way chalkier than you probably should be with these 5 players. But if you want to make this kind of lineup work out, do not sleep on leaving salary on the table. The cheat code of all cheat codes to play chalkier lineups than you should probably be able to is to leave like $400 on the table, is to like go down here to like $6,500. And if there's any of these punt plays towards the bottom that you happen to like, then throw them in. And, you know, we can't build a whole lineup here together, but you guys know I like myself some Nick Dunlop, right? Especially at a course where you can spray it off the tee. If you use Tim, for example, at like $6,400 or like another $6,500 golfer that you have a soft spot for, leaving that salary on the table can help you differentiate yourself enough to not duplicate yourself, even in the largest of large field GPPs, because 99, I forget the exact number. The last time I saw it was 99.7% of lineups spend within $300 of the max price. So if you go down to $6,500 and leave that $400 on the table, that eliminates your chances of duplicating like 99.7% of the time, I guess, of going out there and doing that sort of thing. That accomplishes all the differentiation that you need. So it's not always that you have to do it with the ownership. You still have leverage issues in this sort of lineup. So I guess it is at least worth noting, even if you don't duplicate yourself with this sort of lineup at $6,500, you're not going to be moving up on the leaderboards as much as you'd like when your players end up being optimal plays. But if you're in a large field GPP, you're building it to build the absolute nuts. So leverage, it matters, especially in single entries. That's the kind of build where leverage is probably the most important, I would say, at least actual ownership leverage. But you have to have the absolute nuts anyway. So maybe it's not the biggest of deals, but that's a way that you could play a chalkier build than what you think you're able to. In a more creative fashion. So you can leave salary on the table. Another way would be to do a double spend up. So if you wanted to be super aggressive with your salary, changing up your lineup construction by going like a Ben Griffin, a Howie, and then maybe even like a Higo as your third man in, by taking like 3 of the stud options and then forcing yourself down to the 6 and 7K range for your last 3 players. That's another way to get some differentiation as well. Just a more creative lineup construction that a lot of other people aren't going to get to, on top of just using low-owned players to begin with, which is what I feel like a lot of content creators, start off their analysis with. They always talk about who the field is going with and, the low-owned options that you can use to differentiate yourself. Well, that's DFS 101, right? That's the first way that you start to make sure you're not going to duplicate yourself. The first way to make sure that you're going to move up in this contest. Don't be afraid to get a little bit more creative about that on top of it. And so you said Van Rooyen and Kuchar are your favorite dogs for this week. Well, I bet Kuchar for the over at 68.5 strokes. So I definitely don't agree with you there on that, Jose. Kuchar's old, he's washed up, he's short off the tee. So I'm personally going the other way on that one. He said deep dive on Taylor Montgomery. Is he too putter focused? There's no such thing as too putter focused at a Birdie Fest. A Birdie Fest, we ideally want guys that can putt and hit the ball well. But when you're in a slapdick field like this and you're in the 6 and 7K range, we're not going to get perfect players that are hitting the ball well and making a whole lot of putts. So I'm okay with some of those putting first players. Like there are some guys in my player pool that are ball strikers. There are some guys in my player pool that are really good putters. You just need to have the ability to go low. And, some of those guys do it by hitting darts. Some of them do it by making 15 to 20 footers. He's certainly in that second bucket. So no pushback for me on that one. He said Takumi Kanaya too. So yeah, Kanaya short off the tee. Montgomery is not really short off the tee. So he has a little bit of a better ball striking fit, I would say. But yeah, Kanaya is not the worst fit. I wouldn't eliminate him from your exposure if you're looking at it just from the putting perspective. Putting at a Birdie Fest is a positive, not a negative, that's for sure. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. But now let's look at some of this prop and betting stuff. So for the prop and the betting side, we've got 2 tournaments going on. So I'm going to give you guys my thoughts for both of them. First off, we have the Worldwide Technology Championship stuff at the top. -2 scoring average, 4.68 birdie or better average, bogey or worse average of 2.54 per round. And then at the bottom, we have the Abu Dhabi Championship stuff. And that's what we have in the DP World Tour. It is a playoff event. Mostly top tier players that are in the field. -3 scoring average was by far the easiest that golf tournament ever played. Normally it plays closer to like -1. So that is something to keep a close eye on. Birdie average was 5.29 per round and bogey or worse average was 2 per round. And to circle back to what I'm expecting for round 1, let's start off with the top of the Worldwide Technology. Weather looks very comparable to what we had in all of 2024. A solid wind for all 4 rounds. It wasn't ever really calm any of the 4 days, but it also wasn't windy other than round number 1 last year. Round 1, it was super windy. It actually played over par. Rounds 2 through 4, though, it had like a 5 to a 10 mile an hour wind, and it played close to a -2.5 average. So I'm personally putting the predicted average in that -2 to -2.5 range. Might be a little easier, actually, than the averages that we're seeing here. The only reason I say that is that the round 1 averages last year really offset some of the other averages that we had coming in. But there is going to be some wind out there. It's not going to be a completely calm day. We're not going to take it the whole way to the -3 scoring average that we've seen at times at this course, just because of that aspect. So birdie average, I have it like 4.75 birdies or better per round. Bogey or worse average at like 2.25 to like 2.4. Bogeys or worse per round, something in that range. It's hard to give you exact numbers for round number 1, but that's what I'm thinking compared to the last couple of years. And you can see it towards the bottom. We didn't have any green or fairway averages to work with. They did have green regulation averages from 2023. That's the year when Eric Van Rooyen won at -27. It was also played at a slightly different time of year. That was a 14.6 green and regulation average. So that's the 81.1% that we were looking at before. That's that exact metric there. But other than that, we don't have the fairway or the green data to work with. So rather than speculating, and I don't think we'll even get the boards to work with anyways on like Prize Picks or Underdog, we'll just skip that here for this video. And then for the Abu Dhabi side, this is a probably the harder one to narrow down, but I think the one where we could have a lot more variance. It played -3 last year, and I guess let me just bring up Data Golf so I can show you guys this, because it's quite glaring, the difference in averages that we've had in Abu Dhabi. And it's why, if you're hammering unders on strokes, like I've seen for some content creators, I might be a little careful about that. So you can take a look at last year's average, played -3.21. Take a look at it day by day. They nuked it every single day except for Saturday. Saturday, it played -2.3, but that's still a lot easier than most courses. Let's take a look at this golf course over the years, though. Year before, -1.16. And if we take a look at it day by day, the easiest it played was -1.81. And by the way, it's still par 72, right? It's a par 72 now. It was a par 72 before, and it was the same length. Nothing changed about the golf course. Year before that, it played over par. It played plus 0.62. Year before that, it played -0.28. Again, this is a different golf course. So everything after 2022 is the same exact golf course as what we have this week. So over par, 1 stroke under par, and then last year -3. And we've got to ask ourselves is, what are the conditions going to be this year? Now, the big difference last year, and the reason why it played easier to my knowledge, and this is just me, I watched it last year, this is what the announcers were saying, is that because it was in November, as opposed to being in a different time of year, it was in January, the year before that. And the year before that was also in January 23rd. In 2022, it's warmer, it's firmer and faster, and the ball was traveling further. That is at least what I was hearing from the announcers. I don't have a monthly weather report that I feel good about for Abu Dhabi. From what I understand, they create their own weather in Dubai. They literally seed the clouds with rain and with moisture so that the area can get the rain that it needs. So it's very unpredictable this time of year. If it's very wet like last year, and it's, not firm and fast conditions on the greens, the fairways were firm and fast, but the greens were extremely soft. If it's like that again, it might play -3, but who's to say the irrigation is going to be the exact same? And I mean, just using my thinking cap, I'm a former electrical engineer, so I have some experience thinking through the logistics of this sort of stuff. It's not going to be consistent weather if they're literally seeding the clouds to get the precipitation that they're hoping for. They have the irrigation on the greens. That's why they're going to be soft. That's why they were super soft last year. But it's whether they're actually going to get the fairways as soft as what they want. If they don't, scoring will probably be nuked super low. If they do get it to where they want, and there's some wind that pops up, it could play like you had the couple years before that. So that's why I'm personally a little bit hesitant on this DP World Tour board on it playing super easy. I still think it's going to play like -2. I still think it's going to be easier than the -1 that we had from a couple years ago. But -3 with a 5 birdie average, with all these guys shooting -4, -5, like they have on the board for the DP World Tour, I don't know if I want to take it that far. So I'm going to be selective about what I'm playing on the DP World Tour. There's already a prop that have mixed in on that side, but it's not like I'm just nuking the entire board for unders on strokes or overs on birdies. And I've seen a couple people, like I said, saying that they think the board is absolutely free. It might be. If it plays to -3 like it did last year, then yeah, I agree. A lot of the board would be valued for the props that we have on there, but there's no real way to know that ahead of time. So that's what I'll say with some of these averages. And now let's go through some props that I've already entered. So let me get a sip of water. We'll catch up on the chat. And if you have any bets, any specific props that you guys want me to go through, feel free to let me know. And after we go through a few prize picks props that I've already entered, we're also going to do a few stuff on the Hard Rock Bet site. Let's see. So it looks like we're good on questions. So nothing to go over there. Alrighty, so let's move on. So in terms of props, if you guys caught the video I did earlier, I already mentioned the over I took on Matt Kuchar. By the way, he was at 68.5 strokes. I got that bumped up to 69. So obviously we were able to lock in value there. I know somebody in chat was asking about his under at that number. Even then, the value's on the over. And to go back to these averages, if I think the scoring average is going to be -2 to -2.5, that's no offense to my guy Kuchar, but to push this sort of a number at 69, he would have to gain strokes to the field, either a half a stroke to a stroke gain to the field, depending on the scoring average that we're getting. And Matt Kuchar, he's been okay lately. He's had a few decent events and whatnot, but he's not an elite tier player in this field. He's an average player, most likely, maybe slightly above average, if you want to be as positive as you can be on his outlook as a player. And even then, he would only be pushing a 69 projection and probably projecting even a little bit above that 69 mark. So that was an over that we took at 68.5. Because that did bump, I'm going to give you guys a slight replacement if you're just catching this now. If you didn't catch the stuff that I was doing earlier, then I would follow me on X/Twitter. It's a completely free article that I do every single week. I post that on the Bet the Number blog. It's a complete breakdown of props and betting for all these golf tournaments. It goes through the averages. It goes through some of the things I'm looking for in my modeling, a weather report, and we have a free slip that I'm posting every single week on there. And the Kuchar prop was a part of that slip. But another one that I've mixed in is this over on Nick Taylor strokes. So we'll mix that in as a little bit of a replacement on this prop slip that we're entering. But a lot of the same is true here. If I have the scoring average at like -2 to -2.5, shooting -4 is going to be gaining 1.5 to 2 strokes to the field average, right? If I'm going to have the scoring average at like 70 strokes or something like that, it's going to take a good day to shoot someone like 68 or better. I mean, -4 or better is not something that people are doing regularly on the PGA Tour. And Nick Taylor has not played since the Tour Championship. He played extremely well before the Tour Championship came by, but he's not played in 3 months. And this is the first time that he's ever playing this course professionally. It would be extremely reasonable to expect him to be rusty in his first round back, especially at a course that he's not very familiar with. It'd be different if it was his home course or a course that he's played on tour like 5 or 6 times before. These are greens that he's not familiar with. And also because he's more of an accuracy than a driving distance player off the tee, I don't like the course fit for him either. So I like the over at the 68.5 mark. And yeah, that's why I like fades for this golf course, guys. I know it's an easy course. Everyone's going to be tempted to take unders when they see, oh, -2, -3 scoring average. It all depends on the projections that we're getting. I mean, if they're going to have the field at -5.5, -6, it doesn't really matter how easy that golf course is playing. I'm going to be taking fades for the field in most cases. And especially on players, on Nick Taylor, we're getting the rusty golfer here, but, on a Kuchar, that's just like an average guy. Or in some cases, we can find players that are really struggling to take for fades on these prop sites. That's where a lot of the value tends to be. And the reason why there's a lot more fade value than you're going to find on the positive side is these prop sites know that people don't want to bet against golfers, right? People don't want to bet on guys to struggle on golf. I don't want to do that either. I would much prefer to bet guys for overs on birdies. I mean, I'm just telling you as a golf fan, I would much prefer to do that 99.99% of the time. But as I've gotten more experience doing this isn't, my first rodeo by any means. It's my 4th, 5th year handicapping golf professionally. I've learned that I care about my wallet more than I care about my golf fandom, especially when I'm doing content like this and recommending bets for other people to take. So, I think with my wallet instead of thinking with my heart, and that's why we're on fade value for the first round. So that'll be the first prop that we're taking for the slip. And then the other side of it was a positive stance play I was mixing in, which did they rip it off the board? It looks like it might have gotten ripped off the board. Prize Picks is scared of me again. I love it. There was a little while where they weren't bumping my stuff right away. And I almost, took that as a negative because, I like when they show me some respect and they move the lines on me quickly, right? It shows me that I still have my fastball, right? I was worried about it for a week or two and they weren't bumping my stuff right away. It was a Steven Yeager over on birdies that we got at 5. That was the prop that we took on the Bet the Number article. Again, if you follow me in X/Twitter, it's a free article. It's posted every single week. You would have been able to catch that, but I give you guys a replacement. So we'll go through the DP World Tour prop that I liked. And again, there's only one that I played. So this is the one that I played for the DP World Tour. It's going to be this over on Chris Ryan birdies. He's at 4.5 birdies. So compared to last year's average, he's only going to have slightly worse than average day. And he can cover for us, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to this 5.29 birdie average. And I think that if you're projecting for it to play -3.21, that you're smoking some of that good Zaza or something, because there's just no way in hell that's going to happen. It normally plays closer to like -1. I'm personally projecting the scoring average to be closer to -2. I'm kind of splitting the middle, right? I'm kind of hedging my bets in either direction, not letting the projections get too out of hand in one way or the other. But with about that -2 working scoring average, I've got the birdie or better average at about 4.5 per round. So it's still holding up pretty well. It's not like the entire change, the whole 1.2 stroke change is only going to happen with the birdie or better category. I have that adjusting by about 0.8 per round, but this bogey or worse average adjusting by about 0.35 per round. So that's the other half of it. And you might say, oh, 0.8 plus 0.35 isn't 1.2. No shit, dumbass. I know that. That's because there's things called double bogeys that we have in golf. So sorry if I sounded condescending there, but I can already tell that we're going to get the commenter that's like, oh, dumbass, 0.8 plus 0.35 isn't 1.2. We know that. You have to account for some of those bigger numbers that we have on there. And I've had somebody comment on my Patreon one time, is like, when you add the numbers up, they don't equal the strokes, because they were taking the stroke average and then obviously doing the math that the birdies are better and bogeys are worse, not understanding what the or better or worse means, right? I mean, you got the doubles, you got the triples with the bogey or worse category, but you also have the birdies and then the eagles with the birdie or better category as well. So keep that in mind. And again, sorry if that sounded condescending, but I guess it was. If that's your thought process, you're not as smart as you think you are, put it that way. Let's go through the why I like this Chris Ryan one, though. So if I think the average is still going to be like 4.5 per round, Chris Ryan, who is number 11 on the DP World Tour making birdies, is somebody I'll take to beat that average. And we don't have the averages up here, but you're going to have to take my word for it. I went through it like a couple hours ago, so I can promise you that it's accurate. Number 11 on the DP World Tour in 2025. So that's for the entire season. He's also been hot lately, gaining about 0.5 strokes per round over his last 20 rounds on the DP World Tour. So he's an informed player. He's at what I'm expecting the field average to be, and should be valued towards the over. And if you go to the sports books, what you'll notice is that they don't have any lines for comparison. So like normally Draftkings will give us birdies a better line, strokes lines, all of that to go through. We don't have that for this event. So we're not going to be able to see if it's actually line value, but you guys know I'm a betting man, and I've seen all these lines for the last 2 to 3 months of them posting DP World Tour lines. I can almost assure you that he would be at 5.5 birdies on DraftKings or Fanduel, and would probably, if he was at 4.5 birdies, be like minus 150, minus 160 towards the over. So that's a heavy line value. And just to go to this Nick Taylor prop, because I can show you what we have for that. If I can click the rate events, we'd have a little bit more success in finding that. So if we go to round scores, you'll see Nick Taylor here is minus 135 towards the over. So he's not quite a plus EV value. Plus EV is minus 140 or better on these pick'em sites. Minus 135 can be plus EV. Depends on the kind of slip and the kind of payout that you're getting, whether that's going to be a plus EV payout or not. But minus 135, that's some solid juice that we have towards the over, and that rust and that other stuff we were mentioning before. So, and just to show you that we don't have the odds for Abu Dhabi, I don't get it. Maybe they're, and you know what? I do get it, actually. I was going to say, oh, I don't get it. They're skipping out on all of that profit. But what if they get it wrong? What if I'm right about the course not playing as easy as I think everyone else thinks it's going to? Then it could be really problematic for the sports books. So I guess respect for DraftKings for having some discipline there and not overexposing themselves on props that might not go their way. So that's what we got for round number 1, guys. That's a slip that you guys can tail for some of your exposure. But for everything else that I'm entering for round number 1, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. That's where I'm posting all the underdog and prize picks props that I'm going with. Underdog, I haven't entered anything quite yet. Frankly, I just didn't see any value over there. Their props are pretty similar across the board, except that guys like Jaeger, they had 5.5 birdies instead of 5. So I just felt like the better place to get my exposure was on prize picks. They also have the DP World Tour props and Underdog doesn't. So that's just another reason why prize picks is the better place to play for this kind of a slate. But for anything I'm adding live, we're going to get to see conditions tomorrow morning, be able to add some live stuff based on value that ends up opening up. Make sure to check out the Patreon page for that. But on Hard Rock Bet, I did want to give you guys a couple matchups that I entered for the first day. First up is this Nick Dunlap prop at plus 100. That is against the Davis Riley. They actually have Nick Dunlap as the favorite in the 3-ball that he's playing in. So he's in a 3-ball, Dunlap, Riley, and then some scrub guy as the third player. Dunlap has better odds than Riley to win it. And on DraftKings, they have a matchup between Dunlap and Riley. And Dunlap's like minus 110. So at plus 100, it is slight value compared to that. It's not like it's mega value. It's not like this is like plus 150 as opposed to even money odds or anything, but slight value. And at this golf course, I think he's a fantastic course fit. You may have conned it before, but he's somebody in DFS that I'll be using as a punt play also to try and get some leverage towards the bottom end of the board. Everything other than the off the tee has been there. For the year, he's been gaining a bunch on approach around the green, and he's been one of the best putters that we've had on tour as well. As long as he's not hitting the ball into the jungle off the tee, he's a top 25 player with the rest of his game. So I think this golf course with the 65 to 75 yard wide fairways is going to do wonders for his game. And plus 100 against a player like Riley, he's been struggling himself. I thought that was a pretty obvious piece of value to mix in. And then on the other side of it, I've got this Eric Cole at plus 110. He's going against Max McGreevy. Both players are about tour average or about a neutral over their last 24 measured rounds. So neither one's playing that well, right? Let's just call a spade a spade. Both of them have absolutely sucked over that 24-round sample size. But Eric Cole lately has been gaining a whole bunch of strokes putting. He plays well at Birdie Fest like this. And just like Nick Dunlap, you play him at courses where you can spray it off the tee because he's not long. He's also not very accurate from that perspective. But at courses where the fairway game, the putting matters, that's really where he can shine. And he's one of the best pass-palm putters that we have in the world. He putts on pass-palm greens down here at Albacoa Country Club. That's a course that's, I'm not going to say exactly how far from my house, but extremely close to where I live. I play there all the time. He teaches there. I've never gotten a lesson from Eric, but I see him there all the time talking to people, playing on the pass-palm greens. I don't think it's a surprise, even though it's a small sample size for Eric Cole, that he's done his best work on this type of agronomy. And that's the type of agronomy that we have at this golf course. So yeah, give me him at plus 110, Max McGreevy. I actually kind of like McGreevy. He's one of my, players I have a soft spot for, especially as a value play in DFS. I use him a lot more than a lot of the rest of the industry. But even then, Eric Cole is somebody that I bet for an outright this week. I'll take at that plus 110 mark. So those are a couple matchups that I mixed in. Those are head-to-head matchups, by the way. They're not the 3-ball odds. And on Hard Rock Bet, I took the tie bet being a no bet because, you can take the odds that are slightly better without the tie. So, for example, let me find the Eric Cole one on here. So Eric Cole, if you want to take your chances with the tie odds, why is it not showing up? I see the Eric Cole over there. There he is down at the bottom. You can get him at plus 130 instead of the plus 110. However, if he ties, you're not going to get your money back, right? In this case, if they both end up tying, you're going to get your wager back, which in my opinion is worth the odds change. To go out there, eliminate that sort of exposure, cover your ass if they end up both finishing at like -5 or something like that. And because they're still plus money, we hit on one of these two, we're at least getting our money back. We hit on both of them, or if we hit on one and then push on the other one, that's going to be profit for this kind of a slate. So I wouldn't take it as a parlay. I would bet them as singles. That's what I personally went with on my exposure. But that's what I've got for rounds 1 and 4 this event this week, guys. Best of luck with any of the exposure that you guys are getting to. As I was saying before, any of the prize picks and underdog props that I'm taking on top of what we've already mentioned here, you guys can find on the Patreon page. On there, of course, is also where you can find the spreadsheet I was showing you guys before. That spreadsheet has everything uncensored that you guys saw for the DFS section before. It's got my entire player pool on it, modeling for every single player, shots gained metrics to help you do all the research and all the deep dives that you could possibly want for the entire field, event history, recent form, you name it. All of that by joining the Golf DFS tier. So make sure to check out all of that content if you guys haven't already. Best of luck in the large field GPPs. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of the contest. I hope that we can cash on some of the props that we've entered as well, add to the bankroll, and get to enjoy some golf over the next few evenings. And I'm not sure whether we're going to have ShotLink data this time. I got fingers crossed. I'm really hoping that we do. But for rounds 2 through 4, make sure to keep an eye out for my channel for all the content over the next few days, giving you live streams, projections, also props for rounds 2 through 4 for everything at the World by Technology Championship. And we're obviously adding some stuff for the DP World Tour on top of that, as that's going on overnight, 7-8 hours ahead of us right now in Abu Dhabi. All of that covered throughout the rest of the weekend. So subscribe so you don't miss any of that when it drops. Best of luck with everything that you're going with. And let me see if there's any last second questions there. He said, check out your Eckgoat under 69 strokes. Yeah, let me look at that, Jose. And I've got to say, Eckroat won here before. So unlike Kuchar, who I was kind of giving you some shade on at the 69, right? Because we're fading him at 68.5. But Eckroat, I might be a little bit better behind because he won here before. He obviously has a really good track record of going under that sort of line. And I'm sure I passed him up here. There he is. He's gone under it every time he's played. Yeah, that's to be expected from somebody that's won here before. With a -2 scoring average, maybe -2.5. Him gaining a half stroke to push, or maybe gaining a whole stroke to push, I don't think is out of the realm of possibility. But actually, I'm not even going to say but. I was going to say but. I still don't know if I love it. I'm not going to enter this sort of prop myself. But yeah, if you're going to take an under on strokes, even though I think the board is probably half a stroke to a stroke too low in most cases, it would be on a guy like Austin. Because, I mean, look at all that dark green to the left. He's had some nuclear low rounds around this golf course in the past. But that was when he was playing his best golf, when he had one of his best results that he's ever had on the PGA Tour before. So obviously he was going to go under those sort of lines. So that's why you want to take that with a bit of a grain of salt. That's why I'm not a big last five watcher with a lot of these players. But course history matters, in particular when you're able to win at that sort of golf course. So yeah, if you're going to go with a positive stance play, he'd be the guy to do it with. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support in the channel as per usual. And I'll catch you guys for rounds 2 through 4.